Good day, everybody. I'm here to talk about Many Lives by Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. Here I'm over the Shotover today. See one of the jet boats going down there. Every day I try to go on a different walk in a different place, different book reviews. Over there behind me is the Remarkables, which is one of the coolest names of a mountain range ever. Everything kind of starts from over there. It's fed by glaciers. That's what they call them here in New Zealand. That's Coronet Peak. I kind of live right between here and over there. So yeah, Many Lives, Many Masters, best-selling book. It is, definitely in my top 4, top 5. And I'll kind of go through it today. And eventually, after I get through all my spiritual books, I'll get on to more other kind of books and movies and podcasts and TV shows. I've got a vast list of recommendations in my little OCD list on my page. I read a lot. I read 2 or more books a week, and I only put the best on the list. I'm quite picky, Okay, so where do we get started here with this? It's an amazing book. And I think it's particularly good for the skeptics amongst you, which I certainly was. I'm a man of science and a real skeptic. So, after my near-death experience where I went to the other side for a while, I came back to make sense of it. And I came across this series of books that the universe kind of brought to me about past lives. And I've since read well over 1,000 case studies. And this one is particularly good because it was written by a doctor who was also a skeptic. He was a traditional psychotherapist, and he would often have a variety of clients come in with all kinds of issues, from anxiety to chronic pains to whatever. And he kind of got in the habit of hypnotizing them to go to the source of the problem, right? But this one particular patient he had named Katherine, who was suffering from severe anxiety, aches and pains, fear of drowning, swallowing, bodies of water, she had a whole host of problems. And the twist in the book, which comes about a fourth of the way through, and I'm not going to ruin anything for you, because it's not really a traditional story, it's like a novel. But as he's going through she had 86 previous lives, and I think he highlights maybe a dozen of them in the book. And I'll talk about some of those too, because they're super interesting. This is a young woman. I think she's about 30. She's a lab technician. No interest in past lives, not religious, like a Buddhist or anything. And throughout the book, there's all these cool revelations where people start talking directly to Dr. Brian Weiss about stuff that no one knows about, things that Katherine certainly didn't know about. So as he was healing her, not really a spoiler alert, because as he starts to explore her previous lives, she gets better and better and better until she's like perfectly healed. But at the same time, she kind of ends up being his therapist because of some of the voices that speak through her directly to him, stuff that he had never told anybody, especially her. So let me right now play a clip. It's funny that just before I made this video, I was watching an interview with Sarah Breskman Cosme, who I'm going to talk about her books next. And I mentioned her in my very first video because I love watching interviews with her. She's great. She's kind of like the new Dolores Cannon. And yes, I totally imbibed all of her books. And while I was watching this interview, the interviewer, it's on this podcast I'll share and I'll link to it below, started talking about this book, Many Lives, Many Masters, and how influential it was to him, as well as Dolores Cannon. I'm not sure how much of this clip I'll play, but you'll probably hear him talk about both. And
I know, babe.
That's
Learn
what's
something
happening.
new every day.
Okay,
You know?
I want to take us back to the sort of like the dichotomy of Dr. Weiss's work and Dolores Cannon and their techniques. So I would not be sitting in this chair if it wasn't for Dr. Brian Weiss. Many Lives, Many Masters changed my life, and as like a secular person, opened me up to spirituality. And for those that do not know, which I highly recommend this book, he's a Columbia graduated psychiatrist. This is a New York Times bestselling book. And essentially, he had a patient who he could not treat with pharmaceutical medication because of a fear of choking, an irrational fear of choking. And he tried regressing her to her trauma in childhood using hypnosis. And he would say, go to the root of the trauma, go to the root of the trauma. He even got to a point where she almost drowned in her pool, thinking that would heal her fear of, choking. And he said, go to the root of the trauma. And she slipped into a past life where a flood was coming and it killed her and her child. And the entire book is his work with this woman going into past life regressions and healing all these irrational traumas. He has other books like Same Soul, Many Bodies, Only Love is Real. And then someone was like, oh, you like Dr. Brian Weiss? Check out Dolores Cannon. And I get her books. And it is so wild, so crazy. I mean, you literally have people reliving lives as aliens. I've read in her book someone as like a AI sentient robot guard, protecting a base on a faraway moon in some dimension. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Mm-hmm. And it seemed like Dr. Weiss's intention was always to heal, and he was able to get to the other side when the soul or the patient experienced their death in a past life. They would go to the other side, and he could talk to the oversoul. What is Dolores Cannon doing differently? Like you said, you speak to the oversoul, and you have 6 questions. Is it more investigative, like journalism with Dolores Cannon's technique? Is that a little more what you do, or do you still go in to help people heal?
Oh, I still go in to help people heal, definitely. For my paying clients, they just come in with a list of questions and something they want to heal, because literally you can heal anything. The body is a miraculous machine. And if you even think about it, if you're quiet and you listen really deeply to yourself, you can find out the root cause of why you have a physical issue, and you can even heal yourself pretty easily, actually, if you can listen deeply to yourself and get the message your body is sending you. But Dolores Cannon's method is very investigative. That's why I like it, because I can find out anything. I can find out about the secrets of the universe, what we're doing here and stuff like that. And I want to know. So I basically ask questions that I myself want to know the answers to, and that's how I do my work.
So yeah, this was Dr. Brian Weiss's first time ever dealing with past life stuff, because it just kind of popped onto the scene. So he started to explore them, and it turned out that most of these past lives had to do with her current medical issues and mental issues, which I think, and I've read now countless cases of this through Dolores and Sarah, where a lot of chronic problems you have in this life, they're not even your fault. They come inherited from previous lives. Your soul has these attachments to previous incarnations. I'll list, maybe about a dozen of her past lives down below in the details if you want to read some more. But one of them, she was in ancient Egypt, and she was a young woman, or like an older girl. And then she had a very kind of normal life, right? Sort of pastoral, farming kind of life. And then a giant flood came off the Nile, and the whole village was destroyed. And she talks in incredible detail about what she's wearing, like the way the cloth is made of, about the way the waves came in and just disintegrated all the mud buildings and all the chaos. And she was trying to save people and drowning and all this jazz. And choking, that was one of her other issues, and inability to swallow pills. So after she went into detail in this past life, kind of like Apocalypse Now here, we're kind of right underneath where all the helicopters fly, Queenstown to Milford Sound, on the South Island, in the Southern Alps. After she explored this past life, suddenly she was no longer afraid of drowning, and she could swallow pills. In another case, she was a male in a medieval war. Every time you reincarnate, you may come back as a different sex, a different race, whatever. But anyway, she had a very violent death in a war where she was stabbed repeatedly in the chest when she died. Fairly brutal death. And she would, again, talk in detail about the way the warm blood felt on her and, pretty rough. And that explained all the pains that she currently had in her chest that were inexplicable. After exploring that one, she no longer had those pains in her chest, which is super cool. Now, and the more you read about these things, especially, I would say Dolores focuses on them a lot, but so does Sarah. Now, let's flip the tables. Now, how did Brian Weiss get affected by her? Well, every now and then, while after she was finished talking about her previous life, another voice would appear, and it was a much deeper kind of, I don't want to say extreme, but almost otherworldly voice came out of her. It was still her larynx and stuff, but it didn't sound like her. And he would start talking directly to Dr. Brian Weiss and knew things about his father's death that no one else knew, about the heart attack and the way his dad feels for him and how his dad is still there right beside him. Apparently you have we all have this whole cast of characters around us, all of our ancestors that have died and guardian angels and spirit guides, and they're all around us, helping us all the time in ways we can't really tell. And you can ask them for help anytime. I've started to have better and better communication with I call them Invisible Team Awesome. And there was a particularly striking thing where Dr. Brian Weiss and his wife had a young baby. That goes without saying. All babies are young. But I believe it was a little boy, and he died really early. I think I might get the details wrong. It was either a couple weeks or a month or so after he was born. And he was born with a really unusual situation, which he never told Katherine about. That's the woman that he's hypnotizing. Where, fairly bizarre medical condition, where his heart was born inverted, backwards. And so this voice that was coming through Katherine said, your son, he's with you now, but he died a peaceful death, and he's okay. But when he was born, he came in with his heart backwards like a chicken. And it was just a really specific thing. And the Dr. Brian Weiss was like, whoa, how did you know that? And those are just a couple of examples. And there's many, many more examples of Katherine and this voice that was coming through her from the other side. Knew all these incredible, very personal details about Brian and his wife and their kid. And so, Dr. Weiss found all this to be very comforting and healing and all that sort of stuff. Because you can imagine losing a child and how traumatic that would be. And for this to bring solace to him was quite lovely. This is one of my favorite places to stop here. Little bench. I sit there and meditate, look at the water, zen out. Here are a couple more past lives that she recalled. In one, she was a mother in the Dark Ages, I believe, and her child had the plague. I don't know if it was the Black Plague, but it was a plague. And then she talks in detail about how horrible it was because she couldn't do anything, how her child's skin was all poisoned and pussy, and she would describe the smell of it and how, hopeless she felt and how nobody could do anything. And she was crying throughout the situation and sobbing, and then she described what it was like to bury her child and how traumatic it was, of course. And then that related to her current life, and that in her current life, she had a miscarriage when she was younger. And she had never really been able to process it, right? Or let it go, or, these are very difficult things to let go of. But then after this session, she was able to process that and move on without I don't know if obsessing is the right word, but you know how certain traumatic things can kind of live rent-free in your brain for a while. In another past life, she was a gardener a couple centuries ago, and there was no trauma in this life. It was a very joyful life where she would talk in details about all the plants and flowers in her garden and the feeling of her fingers in the soil and the joy she got from the plants and this sort of thing. And this is a good example that not all past lives are traumatic and to teach you lessons. Sometimes you do learn lessons through dramatic things happening, mistakes. Sometimes you learn things through joy. A couple more lives and I'll wrap it up. I won't make this as long as my other videos. My other ones tend to go quite long. I figure if you're gonna do a book review, you know, do it, take it seriously. One of them, she died, it could have been like, you know, caveman days. She was up in the north and really rough life, frigid, cold, icy. She talks about, you know, just horrible icy winds and horrible frosty conditions. And then she ended up dying of like exposure and starvation to the cold. And then she kind of overcame her extreme dislike of cold weather. I don't think anyone likes cold weather. Well, some people do. But like hers was a little bit over the top. Mine is too, actually. But mine's mostly around cold water. Like I have a lot of friends that just love cold water. I do not. And I'm here in New Zealand. I have cold water around me all the time. I try to get used to it. It just hasn't happened yet. The last one is a little related to me too, because she had another death in the far back that they didn't identify a year, but it could have been even Lemuria, which existed about the same time as, or actually at the same time as Atlantis. But there's more detail on those in not Sarah Landon, who does make great books like The Wisdom of the Council, but Sarah Breskman Cosme. Yeah, there was a huge flood that hit Lemuria for a variety of reasons that Sarah goes into, and you know, pretty much everybody drowned and that sort of thing. And I have my own issues with deep water where I can't see the bottom. Like I don't even like to get in lakes and water ski. I get freaked out, which I know is totally irrational. I know a lot of phobias are irrational. And I've tried some of these regressions myself. I've tried it twice, but it hasn't worked on me. I don't know why. That's okay. Doesn't matter. But yeah, maybe if you, next when I get to the Sarah books, I'm not sure which one to start with. But if you watch the video that I mentioned below, you saw a little clip of it, I invite you to watch the whole thing. That one actually talks more about her latest book, as of the time of recording this, which is a hypnotist guide to Avalon. And I hope you, just watching her, you, again, like Dolores, like I showed in the last video, she's just super authentic and sweet, and Dolores actually talks to her quite a bit in her sessions, so she's carrying on this idea of bringing back ancient lost knowledge to modern day. That's kind of her mission. And that was kind of Dolores's mission too. Yeah, so if you come in as a skeptic about past lives and that sort of jazz, and of course it's not just past lives, but it is how do past lives fit into the fabric of reality? Like, why are we all here? Do we all have to go through 86 lives like this Katherine to learn our lessons? Well, some people have been through 10, 20, 30 lives, some well over 100. All of Katherine's lives, at least those described in this book, were all on Earth. But as you get more and more into this, you'll see they're not always on Earth. And it's fascinating to hear some of the details about people on their planets and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, these people that talk about living life as aliens or whatever, it doesn't diminish or erase the idea of God, because God made all creatures great and small. Of course, Earth isn't the only planet. That would be ridiculous to have such a big, beautiful galaxy and have us be the only populated planet. Anyway, I will see you in the next video. Sending you guys love. Feel free to comment, and I'm going to add this to my new Trey's recommendation playlist. All right, love you guys, and see you next time. Ciao, Bella.